Midnight patrol dead quiet. Kalen walked the line between Sector 7 and the rusted gut of the industrial zone. The air tasted of ozone, synth oil, and piss. Smog blurred the neon signs of the upper levels, casting a diseased orange glow on the perpetual rain-slicked streets. This was his penance, his self-imposed exile from a world that no longer had a place for men like him. A busted ex-enforcer with too much blood on his hands and not enough faith in the system he once served. His rifle was a comfortable weight in his hands, an extension of his will. The only thing in this miserable city that had never lied to him. A sound cut through the drone of the city's ventilation systems. A sharp crack, like superheated ceramic shattering. Not a gunshot. Something cleaner, more exotic. He froze, every nerve ending screaming. He melted into the shadow of a rusted delivery truck, the rifle coming up to his shoulder in a single fluid motion. Another crack, followed by a low snarl that was distinctly not human. Voices followed. Gutter speak. Scavengers. Cornered the bitch. Look at that hide. Consortium will pay a fortune. Kalen moved without thought. He ghosted through the alley, his boots making no sound on the wet pavement. He peered around the edge of a dumpster. The scene was stark. 3 of them, armed with salvaged shock prods and vibro knives. They had her pinned against a graffiti-scarred wall. Her. She was tall, impossibly so, with limbs that were long and leanly muscled. Her skin was the color of polished obsidian, but it wasn't flat. It shimmered with a faint, internal luminescence, as if constellations were trapped just beneath the surface. Crystalline armor, subdermal and fractured in places, wept a glowing, viscous fluid the color of cobalt. Her face was sharp angles and fury. 2 eyes burned with a soft, silver light. She held a shard of her own broken armor like a dagger, her knuckles white. She was wounded. A deep gash on her side pulsed with that same blue light, staining the dark alloy of the wall behind her. She was losing blood, losing energy, but she was not broken. One of the scavengers lunged, his shock prod buzzing. She moved with a speed that defied her injuries. A blur of motion. She sidestepped, brought the crystalline shard up in a vicious arc, and opened his throat. He fell, gurgling, the prod clattering to the ground. The other 2 hesitated, their bravado curdling into fear. That was their mistake. Kalen didn't give them time to recover it. He stepped out of the shadows. The first one saw him, his eyes widening. Kalen didn't aim for the chest. He aimed for the head. The rifle coughed once, a suppressed, final sound. The scavenger's head snapped back, a red mist painting the wall next to the alien's cobalt blood. The third man spun around, raising his knife. Kalen was already moving. He slammed the butt of his rifle into the man's jaw. Bone cracked. The man went down, spitting teeth and blood. Kalen put a boot on his neck and applied pressure until the struggling stopped. Silence returned to the alley. Heavy. Waiting. He turned his attention to the woman. She hadn't moved. Her silver eyes were fixed on him, narrowed into slits. The shard in her hand was still pointed outwards, trembling slightly from exertion. He lowered his rifle, letting it hang from its sling. He held up his empty hands, a gesture that felt foreign and useless. They're gone, he said. His voice was a rusty rasp. Her gaze flickered over the bodies, then back to him. Unflinching. I didn't need your help, she snarled. The words were laced with an accent he couldn't place, sharp and melodic even in their anger. Kalen looked at the gash in her side. The blue light was dimming. The flow of blood was steady. You're losing blood, he stated. It wasn't an observation. It was a fact. I am aware, she hissed, pressing a hand to the wound. A wince of pain broke through her defiant mask for just a second. He took a step closer. The crystal shard in her hand lifted, aimed at his throat. Stay back, human. He stopped. He could see the fine tremors running through her arm. She was on the verge of collapse. That wound needs to be cauterized, he said, his tone flat. The energy signature will draw more than just scavengers. I will handle it. You can't even stand, he countered. Her silver eyes blazed. I can stand long enough to kill you. Kalen almost smiled. Almost. You can try, he said. But you'll bleed out before you get the chance. He took another step. She tensed, preparing to lunge. He ignored the threat. He closed the distance before she could react, his movements economical and sure. He didn't grab for her weapon. He simply stood in front of her, close enough to see the intricate patterns of light swirling beneath her skin. You have two choices, he said, his voice low. You come with me and maybe live. Or you stay here and die. She stared at him, her chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. He could smell her blood. It smelled like ozone and hot metal. Why? She finally forced out. Why help me? Because I'm bored, he lied. The truth was something he hadn't examined yet. An instinct. A flicker of something that wasn't cynicism in the deadened landscape of his soul. He didn't wait for her answer. Her legs buckled. Her defiance finally gave way to the reality of her injury. He caught her before she hit the ground. She was heavier than she looked, dense with muscle and that strange crystalline armor. She let out a sharp cry of pain as his arm brushed against her wounded side. She struggled weakly in his arms, a caged, furious thing. Let go of me. No, he said simply. He adjusted his grip, hooking one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, and lifted her. She stiffened, her body rigid with outrage. I am not some helpless hatchling, she spat, her face inches from his. You are a target, he corrected her. And you're bleeding all over my alley. He turned and started walking, leaving the bodies where they lay. The city would take care of them. It always did. She was quiet for a moment, her energy focused on simply breathing. Then she spoke, her voice a low vibration against his chest. Where are you taking me? Someplace they won't look. You assume they are looking. I don't assume, he said, turning into a narrower, darker passage between two crumbling buildings. I know. The energy signature from her weapon, her blood, it was like a flare in the dark for anyone with the right sensors. And the consortium always had the right sensors. He moved through the labyrinth of the lower city with an easy familiarity. He navigated by the specific stench of each sector, the unique patterns of decay on the walls. This was his territory. The woman in his arms had gone still. He glanced down at her. Her eyes were closed, her face pale beneath its obsidian sheen. The light under her skin was faint, a barely there flicker. She was losing consciousness. He picked up the pace. His apartment was a reinforced box on the 12th floor of a derelict habitation block. The elevator hadn't worked in decades. He took the stairs two at a time, his breathing steady, her weight a familiar burden. He'd carried wounded men before. The feeling was the same. The cold dread. The race against time. He kicked open his door and carried her inside. The room was Spartan. A cot, a weapons locker, a small table with a single chair, and a medical station bolted to the wall. No windows. Just reinforced steel plates where they used to be. It was a bunker. A tomb. It was home. He laid her gently on the cot. Her head lolled to the side, her breathing shallow. He went to the med station and pulled out a trauma kit. A dermal regenerator, a cauterizing laser, blood plasma packs. Human supplies. He hoped they would work on her. He cut away the fabric of her strange, metallic clothing around the wound. Her skin was cool to the touch. The gash was deep, ragged at the edges. An energy weapon, point-blank range. It had burned through her armor and flesh. He grabbed a canister of antiseptic foam. This is going to hurt, he said, mostly to himself. He sprayed the foam directly into the wound. Her body arched off the cot with a silent scream. Her eyes flew open, blazing with pure, undiluted agony. A hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was like iron. The light under her skin flared violently, and he felt a strange, tingling energy course up his arm. He met her gaze and held it. Hold still, he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. He didn't try to pull his wrist away. He just kept working, one-handed, picking up the cauterizing laser. She watched him, her jaw clenched, her knuckles white where she gripped his arm. He activated the laser. A low hum filled the room. He pressed the tip to the edges of her wound. The smell of burning flesh and ozone filled the small space. She didn't scream this time. A low, guttural sound escaped her lips, a sound of pure endurance. Her grip on his wrist tightened until he thought the bones would crack. But she held still. He worked quickly, sealing the smaller vessels, then the main artery that had been nicked. The bleeding stopped. The pulsing blue light from the wound faded, replaced by the angry red of burned tissue. He finished, deactivating the laser with a click. He applied a layer of regenerative gel and covered it with a sterile bandage. Only then did she release his wrist. Dark, bruise-like marks were already forming where her fingers had been. She slumped back onto the cot, exhausted. Her silver eyes were still fixed on him, but the fury had been replaced by a wary assessment. He stood up, flexing his hand. He walked to the small synth kitchen unit and poured a glass of water. He brought it to her. "Drink." She stared at the glass, then at him. "Is it poisoned? If I wanted you dead, I would have left you in the alley," he said, his patience wearing thin. She slowly reached out and took the glass, her movements stiff. She drank it all in one go, her throat working. He watched the play of muscles under her strange, beautiful skin. He felt a pull, a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. He crushed it immediately. It was a liability. She handed the empty glass back to him. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice softer now, laced with weariness. "Kalen." "And what do you want, Kalen?" "Nothing," he said. It was the truth. He wanted nothing. That's what made him safe. That's what kept him alive. She didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes. Her people, whoever they were, clearly didn't do things for nothing. "You lie," she said. "No one risks their life for nothing." "I didn't risk my life," he said. "Those were scavengers. Vermin. And the ones who are coming for me, are they vermin too?" The question hung in the air between them. He didn't answer. He just went to the weapons locker and began to clean his rifle. The familiar, methodical task calmed his nerves. She watched his every move, her eyes tracking the precise, economical way he disassembled the weapon, cleaned each part, and put it back together. It was a language she understood, the language of a warrior. "You were a soldier," she stated. "Something like that," he grunted, not looking up. "Who did you fight for?" "The winning side." For a while, the silence stretched. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't entirely hostile either. It was a truce, a temporary cessation of hostilities born from mutual necessity. He finished with the rifle and started checking the charge on his sidearm. That's when he heard it. A heavy, rhythmic thudding from outside. Mag boots on the metal walkway. At least 4 of them, moving with military precision. He froze, listening. She heard it too. She tried to sit up, her hand instinctively going to her wounded side. "Stay down," he whispered, his voice sharp. He moved to the door, pressing his ear against the cold steel. Crisp, authoritarian voices. "Consortium enforcers. Signals strongest on this level. Unit Beta, secure the stairwell. Gamma, cover the east access." They were organized. They were hunting. He looked back at her. Her eyes were wide, but not with fear. With a cold, hard certainty. This was it. He made a decision in that split second. An illogical, suicidal decision. He pointed to a loose floor panel under the cot. "In there?" "Now." She hesitated. "Now," he hissed. She slid off the cot, a sharp intake of breath as her wound protested. She moved the cot, lifted the heavy panel, and slipped into the dark space below. It was a smuggler's hold he'd found when he first moved in. Cramped and filthy, but hidden. He slid the panel back into place and kicked the cot over it. He grabbed a dirty shirt from the floor and wiped the spot of her blue blood he'd just noticed near the med station. Then came the knock. 3 loud, metallic bangs that vibrated through the entire room. "Open up." "Consortium security." Kalen took a deep breath, wiped the neutrality back onto his face, and opened the door. A man in immaculate black armor stood there, flanked by 2 riflemen. His helmet was off, revealing a face that was all sharp angles and condescension. "A captain." "What do you want?" Kalen asked, leaning against the doorframe, trying to look bored. The captain's eyes scanned the inside of the room, missing nothing. "We're conducting a search. We have reason to believe a fugitive is hiding in this block." "Haven't seen anyone," Kalen said, his voice a flat monotone. "We tracked a Xylosian energy signature to this floor," the captain said, his eyes narrowing. "A wounded one." Kalen shrugged. "Old building. Wiring shot. Get all kinds of ghost signals." The captain wasn't buying it. He took a step into the room, his rifleman fanning out behind him. "We're going to have a look around." It wasn't a request. Kalen stepped aside, putting his hands in his pockets. He watched as they swept the small room. They checked the closet, the tiny bathroom, under the table. One of them kicked the cot. Kalen's heart hammered against his ribs. The soldier grunted, then moved on. The captain ran a scanner over the med station. It beeped. "You've used a medical cauterizer recently," the captain said, his gaze locking onto Kalen's. "Burned myself making dinner," Kalen said without missing a beat. He held up his hand, showing a fresh red mark on his palm he'd made with a hot plate an hour before they arrived. "A contingency. Always have a contingency." The captain stared at the burn, then back at Kalen's face. He was searching for a flicker of a lie, a bead of sweat. Kalen gave him nothing. He was a blank wall, a void. After a moment that stretched for an eternity, the captain seemed to make a decision. "This is a waste of time," he said to his men. "The signal must be bouncing off the conduit pipes. We'll sweep the level below." He turned back to Kalen. "If you see anything, a tall female, obsidian skin, silver eyes, you report it immediately. The bounty is substantial." "I'll keep that in mind," Kalen said. The enforcers filed out, their mag boots clanking on the floor. The captain gave him one last, lingering look of suspicion before he left. Kalen shut the door, locked it, and leaned his forehead against the cool metal. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He waited a full 5 minutes, listening, until the sound of their boots faded completely. He moved the cot and lifted the floor panel. She was huddled in the darkness, her silver eyes glowing. He offered her a hand. She ignored it and pulled herself out, wincing as she put weight on her legs. She stood before him, her expression unreadable. "They will kill you for that lie," she said softly. "They'll have to find me first," he replied, his voice rough. "Why?" she asked again, the single word filled with a universe of confusion and suspicion. "I don't like the consortium," he said. It was the simplest version of a very complicated truth. She studied his face, searching for the real reason. "A bounty is substantial," she quoted the captain, her tone challenging. "I have enough money. Everyone wants more." "I don't," he said, and in that moment, it was the most honest thing he'd ever said. He had stripped his life down to the bare essentials. Survival. Nothing more. But now she was here. A complication he couldn't afford and hadn't asked for. "You need to tell me why they're hunting you," he said. "Not the scavenger's version. The truth." She looked away, her gaze distant. For a long time, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice low and heavy with a weight that had nothing to do with her injuries. "My name is Xylia." She paused. I was, heir to the Xylosian High Court. My sister, Lyra, made a pact with the consortium. She offered them access to our deep core mining technology in exchange for their military support. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "And me? She offered them you. A political prisoner. A symbol of the old regime's fall. Proof to our people that resistance is futile. So she wasn't just a fugitive. She was a princess. A queen in exile. And he was a disgraced grunt living in a concrete box." He almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. "Your sister sounds charming," he said, the dry-witted defense mechanism. "She is ambitious," Xylia corrected, a cold fire in her eyes. "And she underestimated me." "Everyone has a plan until they get hit," Kalen muttered, a line from an old instructor. "I was hit," Xylia admitted, her hand touching the bandage on her side. "But I am not broken." He believed her. He looked at her, truly looked at her. The pride, the defiance, the sheer, unyielding will to live burning in her eyes. It was something he recognized. A mirror to the last, flickering ember of it inside himself. The next few hours passed in a tense quiet. He gave her his cot, and he sat in the chair, cleaning his weapons again. It was the only thing he could do to keep his hands busy, to keep his mind from running down paths it shouldn't. She didn't sleep. He could feel her watching him, her gaze a physical weight in the small room. At some point, he got up to work on his gear, stripping off his outer jacket. The movement pulled his shirt taut across his back and arms. "The scar," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. He stopped. He glanced down at his left forearm. A puckered, ugly mark snaked its way from his wrist to his elbow. A plasma burn. Old, but it still ached when the weather changed. "Consortium?" she asked. He just nodded, not turning to face her. "A disagreement over severance pay," he said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. The truth was Messier. It involved a direct order he couldn't follow and a commanding officer who believed loyalty was a one-way street. He had been on the receiving end of a disciplinary action. He'd returned the favor and walked away from the service for good. "They mark everything they touch," she said, her voice filled with a quiet venom. He turned then. She was looking at the bandage on her own side, her expression a mixture of pain and rage. A shared enemy, a shared mark. It was a bond of a kind. Something shifted in the room. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with her alien physiology. The space between them seemed to shrink. He was acutely aware of her. The way she breathed. The faint, silvery light of her eyes in the dim room. The scent of ozone and something else, something uniquely her, something wild and clean like a storm. "You stare, human," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was a low challenge. "You're hard to miss," he shot back, his own voice rougher than he intended. He could see the subtle tightening of the muscles in her jaw. "Am I a curiosity to you? A specimen?" "No," he said, his gaze dropping to her mouth for a fraction of a second. "You're a problem. A problem you chose to take on." A momentary lapse in judgment, he growled. She actually smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous thing, all teeth and no warmth. "You think I don't see it?" she purred, pushing herself up to a sitting position, her movements slow and deliberate. "See what? The way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. The hunger in you. You are not as dead inside as you pretend to be, Kalen." He felt a surge of anger. She was reading him, stripping away his layers of armor with her words. He walked over to the cot until he was standing over her. "You don't know anything about me," he said, his voice a low threat. She tilted her head back to look up at him, unafraid. "I know you are a man who has been alone for a very long time," she said softly. "And so have I." That hit him harder than any physical blow. The truth of it. The loneliness that was a constant, cold companion. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. She reached up, her long, elegant fingers hesitating for a moment before they touched the plasma burn on his arm. Her touch was cool, but a jolt like electricity shot through him. The faint light under her skin seemed to brighten, to pulse in time with his own frantic heartbeat. He should have pulled away. He should have put the distance back between them. He didn't. He looked down at her hand on his arm, at the contrast between her dark, shimmering skin and his own pale, scarred flesh. Two different worlds. Two different species. And yet, in that moment, they were the same. Two wounded, hunted creatures, backed into a corner. He covered her hand with his own. Her skin was smooth, like polished stone. She didn't pull away. Her silver eyes searched his, looking for something. He didn't know what she found, but her expression softened almost imperceptibly. The next move was his. He knew it. The air was crackling with it. He leaned down, slowly, giving her every chance to stop him. She didn't move. She just watched him, her lips parting slightly. He stopped when their faces were inches apart. He could feel the warmth of her breath on his skin. "This is a mistake," he whispered. "I know," she whispered back. He closed the remaining distance. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision, a desperate, savage claiming. It was all the anger, the fear, the loneliness of years crashing together in a single, explosive moment. Her mouth was firm, demanding. She tasted of ozone and something sweet, like exotic fruit. Her hand left his arm and tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, her grip fierce. His other hand went to her waist, careful of her injury, and pulled her flush against him. It was a fight, a battle for dominance that neither of them wanted to win. He pushed her back onto the cot, his body covering hers, trapping her. She wrapped her long legs around him, trapping him in return. Clothes were a hindrance, an obstacle to be torn away. Buttons popped. Fabric ripped. He explored the lines of her body with a desperate hunger. Her skin was a marvel, smooth and hard in some places, surprisingly soft in others. The crystalline plates under her skin hummed with a low energy, a vibration that resonated deep in his bones. She was a living weapon, a work of art. Her hands were everywhere, learning the scars and calluses that mapped his own history. Her touch was not delicate. It was demanding, possessive. She was marking him as her own. When they finally came together, it was a raw, primal joining, a mutual surrender to an overwhelming instinct. It was not about love or tenderness. It was about survival, about finding a moment of fierce, blinding life in the midst of death. It was about not being alone in the dark. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the narrow cot, the silence of the room broken only by their ragged breathing. The air was thick with the scent of their bodies, sweat and ozone, and something more elemental. Kalen stared up at the stained ceiling, his mind a blank slate. He couldn't process what had just happened. The sheer intensity of it had short-circuited his brain. "I don't do this," he said, the words sounding hollow and stupid even to his own ears. He felt her stir beside him. She shifted, propping herself up on one elbow to look down at him. Her hair, the color of a starless night sky, fell across her shoulder. Her silver eyes seemed to glow even brighter in the dim light. "Neither do I," she replied, her voice rough with emotion. He knew she was telling the truth. There had been a wildness to her, a desperation that matched his own. This was as new and terrifying for her as it was for him. The dynamic between them was shattered, broken and remade into something new, something dangerous. He was no longer just her reluctant protector, and she was no longer just his temporary problem. They were something else now, something intertwined. He didn't have a name for it. He didn't want one. Names gave things power. He looked at her, at the proud, defiant princess lying in his bed, and felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it stole his breath. It was a feeling he thought he had buried long ago. It was a weakness, a vulnerability. And in that moment, he didn't care. The calm didn't last. It never did. A deafening explosion ripped the door off its hinges and sent it flying across the room. It slammed into the far wall with a screech of tortured metal. Kalen reacted on pure instinct. He rolled off the cot, pulling Xylia with him, shielding her body with his own as debris and shrapnel filled the air. Plasma fire stitched across the wall where they had been just a second before, melting the steel into glowing slag. "They're back," he yelled over the ringing in his ears. "I noticed," she shouted back, her voice tight. He grabbed his rifle from beside the cot. He risked a look over the edge of the bed frame. 3 consortium enforcers in heavy assault armor stood in the ruined doorway, their weapons raised. No questions this time. No search. Just extermination. "They're not trying to take you alive anymore," he said grimly. "My sister is impatient," Xylia spat. He fired a 3-round burst at the doorway. The rounds sparked uselessly against their armor. They returned fire, a torrent of plasma bolts that chewed up his meager cover. The cot was disintegrating. "We have to move." He looked around the room, his mind racing. The window was a steel plate. The door was a death trap. That left one option. The floor. "The smuggler's hold," he said. "It leads to the service tunnels." He grabbed a spare power pack for his rifle and shoved it into his pocket. "Go. I'll cover you." She didn't argue. She scrambled over to the floor panel, her movements swift and sure despite her wound. He laid down a suppressing fire, forcing the enforcers to take cover in the hallway. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Xylia ripped the panel open and disappeared into the darkness below. "Come on," her voice echoed up from the hole. Kalen fired one last burst, then threw himself into the opening, pulling the panel partially closed behind him. A plasma bolt hit the panel a second later, melting it shut. They were plunged into absolute darkness. He landed hard on a pile of something soft and foul-smelling. He could hear Xylia's breathing nearby. Above them, the sound of heavy boots and angry, muffled shouting. "This way," he whispered, grabbing her hand. Her skin was warm. Her grip was strong. He led them through the narrow, cramped space, relying on memory and touch. The tunnel was tight, filled with pipes and conduits that snagged at their clothes. The air was cold and damp, thick with the smell of decay and rust. Behind them, they heard a loud grinding sound. They were cutting through the floor. "They're coming," she said, her voice calm. "Let them," he said. "This is my home turf." He found the access ladder and started to climb down into the main service corridor. It was a dark, cavernous space, a concrete river flowing through the bones of the city. A faint emergency light cast long, distorted shadows. They started to run. Their footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness. They moved as one now, a single unit. He took the lead, his rifle at the ready, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. She ran just behind him, her strange, blade-like weapon now reformed in her hand, watching their back. They were no longer a man and a woman. They were a weapon, forged in violence and desperation. They ran for what felt like hours, twisting and turning through the labyrinthine tunnels. The sounds of pursuit faded, but they didn't slow down. They knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Finally, Kalen found what he was looking for. A rusted metal door, almost hidden behind a cascade of leaking pipes. He pried it open with a groan of protest from the hinges. It led into an abandoned subway station. The air was still and dead. Ghosts of old advertisements peeled from the tiled walls. A derelict train sat on the tracks, covered in decades of dust and grime. It was safe. For now. He slumped against a pillar, his lungs burning. Xylia leaned against the wall opposite him, her head thrown back, her chest heaving. Her wound had reopened. A dark, wet patch was spreading on the makeshift bandage. "Sit," he ordered, his voice harsh. She slid down the wall to the floor without a word, her face pale. He knelt in front of her and examined the wound. It wasn't bleeding as heavily as before, but it was bad. He didn't have any more medical supplies. "This needs to be treated properly," he said, his voice tight with a frustration he couldn't hide. "It will heal," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. He looked at her, at the exhaustion etched on her proud features. "Tell me everything," he said. "No more secrets. If we're going to get out of this, I need to know what we're up against." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she began to speak. She told him about her world, Xylos, a planet of warriors and artisans, where power was passed down through matrilineal lines, proven by ritual combat. She told him about her sister, Lyra, always in her shadow, always resentful. Lyra was a politician, not a warrior. She saw tradition as a cage, not a strength. "She believes our ways are archaic," Xylia said, her voice laced with bitterness. "She wants to modernize our world, to open it up to the galaxy, to the consortium. For a price," Kalen finished for her. "The price is our sovereignty," she said. "Our soul. The consortium doesn't make partners. They make clients. Slaves." She explained the deal. Lyra would stage a coup, backed by consortium special forces. In return, the consortium would get exclusive rights to Xylos's core crystals, a powerful energy source that could shift the balance of power in the sector. "And you were the only one who could stand in her way," Kalen surmised. "I was the commander of the Royal Guard," she said. "I challenged her claim, as is my right. She refused the ritual combat. She called it barbaric. Instead, she had her new consortium friends ambush me." Her eyes grew distant, filled with a pain that was deeper than any physical wound. "My guard. They fought for me. They died for me. The last of her people. Sacrificed for a traitor's ambition. I was injured in the fight," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "I managed to escape to a transport, to get off-world. I thought I could find allies, rally support. But they tracked me here." The story settled in the silence of the dead station. It was bigger than he had imagined. Not just a chase. It was a war, and he was standing in the middle of it. "We can't keep running," he said, the words solidifying a thought that had been forming in his mind. "They'll level this city to find you. They won't stop. I have nowhere left to run," she said, a note of despair creeping into her voice for the first time. He reached out and tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. "So we stop running," he said, his voice hard as steel. "We fight back." A flicker of her old fire returned to her eyes. "Fight them? We are two people against a corporate army. Armies have supply lines," he said. "Command structures. Weaknesses. You hit them where they're not expecting it. You make them bleed." He stood up and began to pace, his mind already working, plotting. "The consortium's headquarters in this sector is the Spire. Everything flows through there. Communications, logistics, command, and control. It is a fortress," she said. "Every fortress has a sewer pipe," he countered. "I used to work security contracts for the corps that built it. I know the maintenance shafts, the power conduits, the blind spots in the surveillance grid." He stopped pacing and looked at her. "We don't run from them," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "We hunt them." Xylia stared at him, at this broken, cynical human who had stumbled into her war. And for the first time since her sister's betrayal, she felt a flicker of hope. "What is the plan?" she asked, her voice steady again. "The plan is simple," he said. "We get inside the Spire. We find the command deck. And we cut the head off the snake." It was a suicide mission. They both knew it. But it was better than dying in a dark alley or a forgotten tunnel. It was a chance to fight back. A chance to die on their feet. The infiltration was easier than it should have been. Kalen guided them through a series of forgotten aqueducts and power conduits, a path that didn't exist on any official schematic. They emerged into the lowest maintenance level of the Spire, a place of humming machinery and oppressive heat. The air tasted of ionized particles and recycled oxygen. They moved like ghosts through the metal guts of the building. Kalen took out 2 guards with silent, brutal efficiency, using his knife. Xylia disabled a security drone with a thrown shard of her crystalline armor, shorting out its systems before it could raise an alarm. They were a perfect team. His knowledge of the terrain, her speed and alien senses. They communicated with hand signals and glances, their movements perfectly synchronized. The bond forged in his apartment had been tempered in the tunnels below the city. Now, it was being honed into a weapon. They found a service elevator and rode it up, bypassing level after level of barracks and administrative offices. They got off 10 floors below the command deck. The security was heavier here. Patrols of enforcers in full combat gear. No more stealth, he whispered. Good, she replied, a feral grin on her face. They stepped out of the shadows. The first patrol didn't even have time to raise their weapons. Kalen's rifle barked, dropping 2 of them with precise shots to the helmet's weaker visor seam. Xylia was a blur of motion, a whirlwind of obsidian and silver light. Her crystal blade appeared in her hand, and she carved through the remaining 2 soldiers with a terrifying grace. The alarm blared. Red lights flashed. A synthesized voice announced a security breach on their level. So much for the quiet approach, Kalen muttered. This is more honest, she said, her eyes blazing with the thrill of battle. They ran down the corridor, a storm of violence. Doors slid open, and more enforcers poured out. They became a back-to-back whirlwind of death. He was the anchor, the solid wall of firepower. He laid down suppressing fire, called out targets, created openings. She was the blade, the lightning strike. She flowed around him, exploiting every gap in the enemy's defense, her movements a deadly dance. They fought without speaking, anticipating each other's moves, covering each other's weaknesses. It was synergy. It was beautiful. They reached the final blast door to the command deck. It was sealed. Get ready, he said, planting a breaching charge. He blew the door. They stormed through the smoke and flashing lights into the heart of the consortium's power. The command deck was a vast, circular room. Technicians scrambled at their consoles. In the center, on a raised platform, stood a woman. She was Xylosian, her skin the same obsidian as Xylia's, but her eyes held a cold, calculating ambition instead of a silver fire. She wore the robes of a ruler, but they looked wrong on her, a costume she hadn't yet grown into. Lyra. Flanking her were 10 soldiers in the ornate armor of the Xylosian Royal Guard. Traitors. And beside her stood the consortium captain from Kalen's apartment, a gleaming plasma blade in his hand. Sister, Lyra said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. You always did prefer to make a mess. And you always preferred to let others clean it up for you. Xylia shot back, her gaze fixed on her sister. The air crackled with hatred. It didn't have to be this way, Lyra said. You could have stood with me. We could have led our people into a new era of prosperity. Prosperity for you, Xylia snarled. Slavery for them. Lyra sighed dramatically. So stubborn. So sentimental. Captain, kill her. And her pet human. The captain smiled, a predator's smile. With pleasure. The Royal Guard charged. Kalen and Xylia met them head-on. It was a different kind of fight. These were not corporate grunts. They were Xylosian warriors, trained in the same deadly arts as Xylia. Kalen found himself on the defensive, his rifle less effective against their speed and personal energy shields. He switched to his sidearm and his knife, the fight becoming a brutal, close-quarters brawl. Xylia was a force of nature. She moved through her former comrades like a vengeful goddess, her blade a blur of silver light. Every movement was a killing blow, but there were too many of them. Kalen took a glancing blow from an energy baton that sent a jolt of agony up his arm, making him drop his knife. He saw a guard break through their line, charging at Xylia from her blind side. Xylia, he yelled. She turned, but it was too late. The guard's blade was inches from her back. Kalen didn't think. He acted. He threw himself forward, shoving her out of the way. He felt a searing, white-hot pain as the consortium captain's plasma blade, meant for Xylia, plunged into his side. The world dissolved into a haze of agony. He heard Xylia scream his name. The sound was filled with a rage that was terrifying to behold. He fell to his knees, his hand pressed against the smoking, cauterized wound in his gut. He looked up. He saw Xylia, her face a mask of incandescent fury. The light beneath her skin erupted, no longer a shimmer, but a blazing corona of power. She moved faster than he thought possible. She disarmed the guard who had attacked her, broke his arm, and slammed him into a console. Then she turned her attention to the captain. He raised his plasma blade, but he was too slow. She was on him, her crystal blade a silver streak. The captain's head left his shoulders. His body stood for a second before collapsing in a heap. The remaining royal guards faltered, their morale broken. Xylia ignored them. She walked toward the platform where her sister stood, her face pale with shock. "It's over, Lyra," Xylia said, her voice dangerously calm. Lyra fumbled for a hidden sidearm. Xylia crossed the remaining distance in a heartbeat, grabbing her sister's wrist and twisting until the bone snapped. Lyra screamed. Xylia disarmed her and threw her to the floor. Victory. Kalen watched it all through a darkening tunnel of vision. He tried to stay upright, but the strength was leaving his limbs. He collapsed onto the cold metal floor. Xylia ran to him. She knelt beside him, cradling his head in her lap. "Kalen," she whispered, her voice choked with a frantic desperation he had never heard from her before. Her hands hovered over his wound, as if she could will it closed. "Looks like my turn to bleed out," he managed to choke out, a bloody smile on his lips. "No," she said, her voice fierce. "I do not permit it." She ignored her sister's whimpering, ignored the stunned technicians and the surrendering guards. She activated a console with one hand, her fingers flying across the controls. A coded message, a high-frequency broadcast. "This is Xylia, rightful heir of the High Court," she said, her voice ringing with an authority that could not be denied. Her words were broadcast to her loyalist fleet, hidden in the outer system. She announced her sister's treason, the consortium's defeat. She announced her return. Then she looked down at him, her silver eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "And I announce my debt," she said, her voice now a low, intimate whisper meant only for him, but broadcast for all her people to hear. To this human, this warrior. He was fading fast. The room was spinning. "Our law is ancient," she said, her voice urgent. "It demands reciprocity. A life for a life. A bond for a bond." She placed her hand over her sternum, where a single, large crystal was embedded in her flesh, glowing with a soft, internal light. It was the heart of her being, the core of her life force. "This is my life, Kalen. My soul," she said, her eyes locked on his. "My law has a name for what you did. It is the act of a bondmate, a protector, a husband." The loyal guards who had surrendered gasped. They understood. "The ritual must be completed," she said. She looked at him, her expression a mixture of desperation and fierce command. "Touch it, human." He was barely conscious. It took every last ounce of his strength, but he lifted his hand. His bloody fingers reached out and touched the glowing crystal in her chest. The moment his skin made contact, a blinding flash of silver light erupted from her, engulfing them both. He felt a sensation he couldn't describe. It wasn't pain. It wasn't pleasure. It was connection. He felt her strength, her life, her very essence pouring into him, healing him, changing him. And he felt his own consciousness, his own being, flowing back into her, creating a circuit, a permanent, unbreakable bond. Then, darkness claimed him. He woke up to the low, rhythmic hum of advanced technology. He was lying on a surface that was not quite a bed, something that molded perfectly to his body. The air was clean, sterile. He sat up. There was no pain. He looked down at his side. There was no wound, not even a scar. Just smooth, healthy skin. He felt strong, stronger than he had in years. "You are awake." Her voice. He turned. Xylia stood by a large viewport, looking out at the curve of the planet below. They were on a ship, a Xylosian ship. She was dressed in the formal regalia of her people, dark, elegant armor that shimmered with silver filigree. She looked like a queen. She turned to face him. Her expression was different. The wariness was gone. The anger was gone. In its place was a deep, possessive calm. He could feel her, not just with his senses, but in his mind. A low, thrumming connection, a background hum that was her presence. The bond. "What did you do to me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I saved your life," she said simply, "as you saved mine. The bond shared our life forces. It healed you. The guards. They called it a marriage," she finished for him. "In the eyes of my people, and by our most sacred law, you are my husband." He stared at her, speechless. Husband. The word was alien to him, a concept from a life he had never lived. She walked over to him, her movements fluid and regal. She stopped in front of him and reached out, her fingers gently tracing the spot where his wound had been. Our fight is not over, she said, her silver eyes intense. The consortium is a hydra. You cut off one head, two more appear. And my people, they need a queen. He looked into her eyes, into the eyes of this alien princess who had turned his world upside down. He saw her strength, her determination, and he saw his own future reflected there. His exile was over. He had a purpose again. He had her. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his. And a king, she whispered.